Hello and welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. This here is another video I'm making for Christians with an interest in Bible prophecy in particular, but anybody else who has an interest in what the Bible has to say about giants might also enjoy watching this video. I think I need to tilt it a bit here. What I want to talk about here in particular is the concept of giants in the Bible. And if you watched my last few videos about prophecy, you'll know that I have both a sincere interest in Bible prophecy, but also I'm concerned about the way that prophecy is becoming, there's a cult following building around Bible prophecy, to the point where people are so focused on Bible prophecy and the idea of the rapture, which is legitimately an escape for Christians to escape this world before the tribulation. That is what it is, but we're not supposed to focus on that. We have work to do while we're here. We're supposed to occupy. And one of the areas in Bible prophecy, of many, where people are They grab hold of an idea and they won't let it go no matter what. They just won't let it go. One of those ideas is the ideas of giants in the Bible. Now, once you get it in your head that there were these big, tall people walking the earth, it doesn't take long before you have to say, well, how could that happen? And there's people out there who will present you with this idea. Well, the fallen angels came down and they took human women for their wives and they impregnated those women, and their hybrid children became these giants, also sometimes called the Nephilim in the Bible. And, you know, on the surface that sounds very plausible, and I'm not here to say that that did not happen. Absolutely. I am here to say I do not believe that is what happened. I do not believe that is what the Bible's talking about at all when it talks about giants. And the problem is that if you're approaching Bible prophecy as a means of escape, you know, you can sit at home and you can watch all these prophecy videos and think about it and study it and watch the news and look for prophecy being fulfilled. If you do that all the time, you're not doing what you're supposed to do while you're here, which is primarily building your relationship with God, directly with God, a real relationship, but also spreading the gospel, telling others about, you know, salvation through Jesus, and helping the poor, the widow, the orphan, the homeless, all the things you're supposed to be doing out there. You know, training yourself to get away from materialism and the things of this world. Everything in this world is going to burn with fire. The whole earth is going to be destroyed and be rebuilt by God. So why are you putting all your time into your house or your car or whatever? It's not going to last. And you can't take it with you anyway. So whenever I see an area of Bible prophecy where people are being drawn toward one explanation to the exclusion of all others, and it is so compelling from a storytelling standpoint that it's serving as a distraction, and it seems to be keeping them from being able to see the bigger picture of things, I get concerned. And when it comes to giants, that is one of those areas. And, you know, people who don't believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God, of course, you know, I understand perfectly why they would sit there and shake their head and go, you gotta be kidding me, these people are talking about giants. Got it. Right. There's a group I want to join. You see, if you're gonna go off into some kind of a la-la land, or you're gonna go off in somewhere that just isn't really justifiable, you've got to think about the consequences. You're setting an example for other people, and they're going to look at you and say, why would I want anything to do with Christianity? These people believe in giants. They believe that angels became bad, were called demons, and came down and impregnated women and created hybrids, which sounds a lot like ancient Greek mythology, doesn't it? You know, where the Titans and all those heroes of old came from. What I want to do here is propose to you an alternative explanation It is a proposal only. I do not have the background in, especially in studying Hebrew and Greek and such, to do the kind of word study I want to do. Now, I know how to do that without knowing the language to an extent. Without my computer, though, I'm limited to what I was able to do before my computer died, which was a fair amount, but not enough. And the problem is, I don't have any of my documentation here. It's all on that dead computer. All I have is this little tiny tablet. And so, let's get started here, folks. I want to start with, as I have with the other videos, when the disciples asked Jesus, what will be the signs of your second coming? And what they called the end of the world, which is really the end of the age. The end of this, humans being what they are today on this planet. What will be the signs of that? The first thing out of Jesus' mouth, and I've got to use my eyes here, and I got a lot of glare on this little tablet. The first thing out of Jesus' mouth was, take heed that no man deceive you. And he goes on and on, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, which means anointed, and shall deceive many. And what he meant there was deceive many in the form of false religion. Okay, if someone comes up and says, I am Christ, and deceives you, are they going to say, I am Christ, and then deceive you by telling you that, I don't know, climate change is real? I mean, there's other people who are deceiving you with things like that, but is that what someone who claims to be Christ would be worried about? Christ is going to talk about your relationship with God, because if an antichrist or a false Christ can mess that up, that has eternal consequences for you. You can go to hell for that. I don't think other than the fact that, climate change and this idea of little boys being little girls and all this nonsense we're dealing with today cumulatively can send you off on a path away from God, the focus of this deception is always ultimately going to be a religious deception to pull you away from God. Now let me ask you a question. If people are out there saying, there were giants in those days, big, tall, boom, 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 figures, what's the first thing you think of? I'm not talking about your great-great-great-great-grandmother or grandfather. I'm talking about you. What's the first thing you picture when you picture a big giant? It's probably one of two things. It's probably either going to be your vision of whatever you pictured in your mind when you heard the story of Jack and the Beanstalk when you were a kid. And I often picture Skipper. You remember Gilligan's Island when they did the Jack and the Beanstalk thing? Skipper was the giant. I sometimes picture that. Or you're going to picture something that people in our generation only have any concept of, which is Hollywood. You're going to picture some Hollywood, huge, giant CGI created being. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that with CGI, you can create things that defy the laws of nature. You can create anything you want, because it's a fantasy world. It's all in your imagination. You're visualizing it, but it's all in your imagination. It doesn't happen in the real world. There are certain laws of nature in this world. They were set forth in place by God himself when he created this world. When you put those laws together, you find things such as animals and humans. Given our bone structure and the amount of weight, and as a person gets taller, if you look at a plot of the average weight versus their height, the weight starts to increase pretty dramatically. But then you have another law called the law of gravity, or law of universal gravitation. The Earth is pulling down on things, and it pulls down on them relative to their mass. So as you become more massive, the Earth is pulling down on you more and more. That means there's a limit to how big you can be, because there's going to come a point when the Earth wins and you get too big and you can't even move. You can't even function as a living creature. You can't walk, you can't motate, you can't move your arms. And if you think that these giants are great warriors swinging clubs and knocking out 100 people with one swing, that isn't what happens. If there's somebody who's 15 feet tall, if that were even possible, they would struggle their entire life to just crawl around on the ground probably. They couldn't even stand up. The weight of the pull of gravity would just compress them into the ground. Now, what a lot of people do is they come up with a way, they want to believe that so badly that they come up with some idea that is not in any way justified by the Bible, and that's where they start getting away from God. Deception. And they'll say things like, well, back then gravity was different than it is today. And it's like, really? Gravity was different? Now, I can see certain things. There might be something with radioactive decay. That makes sense. There was no way to tell what radioactive decay was like back then, which means that carbon-14 dating might be garbage. Carbon-14 dating doesn't necessarily mean anything. We don't have a way to prove how things decayed back then. But gravity is a whole other story. Okay, gravity is not subject to change. Radioactive decay is conceivably subject to change. Doesn't mean it was, but it's possible. If the gravity were that much different than the smaller people, the normal-sized people, they would also function differently. For them, it would be a lot like walking on the moon, because they wouldn't have so much pull of gravity. So a normal-sized person like David, he would just be like Achilles, just swift-footed Achilles, just running and jumping in the air and flying. And I mean, one of my favorite verses in the Bible is simply this. It says, "Let us reason together." God does not want you to have blind faith in Him. He provided the Bible, which proves itself. You have to study the Bible to know that. Of course, you're going to have no idea if you don't actually study the thing. But if you study the Word of God, you will find that over and over and over it verifies itself. This book against that, against this, against archaeological evidence from today, against common sense, against reason, against legitimate science. All of these things are perfectly consistent. And there's just no other religious text that even enters that arena. The Bible lives and exists entirely in that arena of reason. Now, God made the Bible kind of cryptic, well, very cryptic, for a reason. I mean, for one thing, it's communicating an awful lot of information. Not just what you read, but all the things you can gather by putting things together. Because when you find out that Genesis and Revelation, when you read the first and the last book together, there's certain things in there that you go, oh my goodness, I just learned something brand new that neither one taught. But it's more than obvious that that's what the purpose of these two books was. So if we're going to reason together here, you have to pull yourself away from these preconceived ideas you have, or these desires to see some kind of a Hollywood giant. The Bible was written, these books were written, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. They weren't talking about Hollywood giants. They weren't even talking about Jack and the Beanstalk. They were talking about people who were taller than normal. What was normal back then? I don't know. Probably around 5'8". So a giant back then, a giant person, just like today, would be what, 6.5 feet? 6 feet, 6.5 feet, 7 feet? That's pretty tall. Now, people who are that large today have trouble moving around. Now, you can look at basketball players. There are some exceptions. They might look really smooth on the basketball court, but in ordinary real life, they're kind of awkward. They're just kind of awkward. And if you get bigger than that, if you get up into something like 8 or 9 feet, you're going to start having that gravity effect. Now, it's not to say you can't have somebody who's that tall, but we also have, well, what we used to call midgets. They're calling them little people now, but we also have people who are very, very small. Well, okay, they're small. Does that mean, they're lighter, therefore they're faster? Well, put a midget in an Olympic run, the 100-yard dash, and see how well they do. You see, there's laws of nature. They are smaller. They have smaller legs. Their span is shorter. There's no way they're going to go faster. It can't happen. Likewise, if you have people who are super big like that, they're going to be awkward. They might have much longer span, but it takes a tremendous amount more energy for them to move their leg out to that span than it does for you to do it. So you can take your 2 steps to cover their 1 step, but you can do it while expending less energy. Now, I'm not here to go into the physics and the biology of all this, but if you don't realize that the idea of just, 12, 13, 15-foot giants is, I'm not gonna say it didn't happen, but it isn't consistent with anything I understand about the world we live in. It doesn't make any sense. And the Bible says to reason together. Reasoning does not mean, oh, this doesn't make any sense at all, therefore I'm going to believe it. That's not reasoning, folks. That's the opposite of reasoning. So the question would be then, what were these giants that the Bible talks about? And let's go to where it talks about the giants, because, if I'm going to talk about it, I should at least show you the verse. And here's one where I'll probably have to edit as I look for it. Okay, so here's the passage, really the only particular passage that talks about giants in the Bible. This is from Genesis, and it's introducing Noah and the times of Noah and why God was going to destroy the world with a flood. This is from Genesis. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And here's the big verse. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And it goes on to say, a little bit different, but it goes on to say, And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now there's some really interesting things in there. This is the King James Version, right? So it says right there, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. Now here's where you have to get into the word studies. What was the original word, the original Hebrew word in there? Was it the word for a giant? Or for that matter, did Hebrew even have a word for giant? Because if there were no giants in the world, why would you have a word for it if you didn't have Hollywood and Jack and the Beanstalk? People aren't going to be thinking in terms of giants. Someone might conceive of it once in a great while, but it's not some part of your common lexicon, because giants don't exist, and people didn't have the leisure to go off into la-la land in their imaginations the way we do today. So what was the word that was translated as the word giants? Well, the word Nephilim is what is used. Now the thing is, the Bible never explains what Nephilim means. And this is one of the things I love about the Bible. Okay? The word isn't, it's as if you come up with your own word, you come up with your own terminology, and you speak normal English, and then you throw in the term that you created, and you continue on. Other people out there don't know what you're talking about. You could say, even for me, I use the word authoritative-sounding to talk about this bile-spitting, visceral hatred of the homeless. Racism against different racism, authoritative-sounding against homeless people. Well, other people out there don't know what that word is. I created it because we need a word like that in order to start forming a legal basis to get justice for homeless people. You've got to have a term for the problem before you can fix the problem. Well, in the Bible, quite often, when it comes to something like that, the Bible will create the word, and it's the context that defines what the word is. There is no definition. You can't go to a Hebrew dictionary back in when Moses wrote this down. There was no Hebrew dictionary you go to and look it up, and it says, oh, the Nephilim, what was that? And I go to my dictionary and it says Nephilim, oh, giants, big tall people. Okay, there was nothing like that. The word Nephilim just bam, just shows up there, and there's no explanation for what it means. So the only way you're going to really know what it means is to reason. Let us reason together. Alright? So from the context, you get something about it already. There were giants in the earth in those days. So there were, let me start using the word Nephilim a little more. There were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that. Well, what does that mean? Okay, it means that back before Noah, at the time right before Noah built the ark and got into the ark, there were Nephilim in the world. But we don't know what the word Nephilim means. So why is that there? Interesting, huh? What about the context, though? When the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. And the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. That tells you what the Nephilim were. It doesn't talk anything about how tall they were. It doesn't even mention it. It doesn't say there were giants, there were Nephilim in the earth in those days. They were 13 feet tall. We were like grasshoppers compared to them. It doesn't say that. It says there were Nephilim in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. This Nephilim became mighty men which were of old, the past, men of renown. What does renown mean? Fame? Means you've heard of them. They're well known. From the context, it doesn't seem to be talking about people who are really, really tall. It seems to be talking about something else. Now, as an aside, let me jump over here for a moment. Remember when, after the Exodus, when all of the Hebrews, led by Moses, traveled out of Egypt, and God was going to have them. He was going to give them the land that He promised to Abraham, basically what we consider Israel today. In fact, a lot more than that. And remember, they sent spies in to look at the Canaanites and see what their enemy was going to be like. Now, the Israelites had something like, there's so many estimates of how many of them there were, but, 1 million, or I don't know, there were a lot of them. Okay, and these were big, strong people who had, the men had been working as slaves. They were quite well built, quite healthy in that sense. There's some evidence anyway that they had taken a lot of things from the Egyptians, treasure and things like that. So they had money. When the Egyptian army came after them, I think one possible reason, again, not being dogmatic, one possible reason when the Egyptian army followed and, they were swallowed up and destroyed, that would provide a lot of weaponry that the Israelites could take, so they would be armed. The Canaanites weren't going to be able to do a whole lot against an army that's the size of an entire nation. That's today like what the book of Revelation says, where the kings of the east will come over with an army of 200 million people. That made no sense back then. There weren't that many people on the earth probably. But now there are, China alone can field an army of 200 million men if it wanted to. Okay, some of these things, you got to think about them. Some of these things obviously are meant for the future because the circumstances at that time won't allow what it's talking about. The circumstances in the future will. A lot of prophecy talks about things where people will know what's going on around the whole world. Well, you couldn't do that before modern technology. Through all of human history, you could not do that. But now you can. And that's what tells you a lot of these things they're talking about today are at least were not possible until today. So when it talks about the end times, that's one reason we believe that this is the end. This is the end times. Because now we can do the things, we can fulfill the prophecy of the Bible, where they couldn't do it before. Well, when they sent the spies into Canaan to see what it was, or Canaan, to see what they were up against, Remember, they came back and they were all fearful, and they said, "Oh, they're huge. We're never going to win against these people." They said they're huge. They're giants. We are like grasshoppers in their sight. And the Hebrews got scared, and they cut and run for it. They disobeyed God. God said, "I am going to make sure you win. I just made sure you won against the Egyptians. Why wouldn't I make sure you win against them? I promised you this land. I told you to go in and take it. And because of what a couple spies said, you're too scared to do it. So now you've got to pay the price." And the Hebrews were punished for that severely. But what about these spies? One thing we know that they said was, "We are like grasshoppers to them." Okay? If you have a giant that's 13 feet high and you're 5'8", are you like a grasshopper to them? Or are you like a midget? Not even that. You're even taller than that compared to them, aren't you? I mean, if I'm standing next to a kid who's 5 years old, that's a good relative proportional difference in height. But do I look at that kid and say, "Well, that kid's like a grasshopper to me"? No. If I see that kid and I see a grasshopper next to that kid, the grasshopper is this big and the kid is, what, 3.5 feet tall? Okay? These spies were lying, folks. You see, let us reason together. The spies were scared, so they exaggerated. They went out there and said, "Oh, these people are huge. We're like grasshoppers to them." They were not like grasshoppers to them. For a 5'8" person to appear as a grasshopper next to this person's head would have to be sticking in the upper atmosphere. I mean, they wouldn't be 13 feet tall. They would be a mile tall. Think about it, folks. This doesn't make any sense. These spies were lying. That's the whole point. That's why it's in the Bible. It isn't there to make a point that there were giants there. There's nothing there that legitimately, credibly says there were giants in Canaan. I'm not saying there weren't. I'm just saying that particular episode doesn't tell you that there were. What it tells you is that these spies were fraidy cats. They were scared. They did not trust God, who said, "I will make sure you win the battle." So they said, "We're like grasshoppers to them." They lied. They exaggerated. And those lies and exaggerations are what scared all the other Israelites who had numerical supremacy that couldn't be denied. And they got punished for it. Okay, so what did they see? They probably saw some big warrior types with weapons and, big, strong, but these people had never formed an army. They had never fought a battle before. I mean, God did everything with Pharaoh. All the plagues, the Exodus, the parting of the Red Sea, all these miracles were things that God did, and that's what God wanted, was for them to trust God. That's what He wants for us. Trust me. Quit trying to do it by yourself and let your Father in heaven do it for you. He wants to. He loves you. Let Him. But you have to obey Him. So we got to get this out of our head, that this whole thing about we are like grasshoppers to them somehow proves that there were giants. It has nothing to do with it. Okay, today I would say that's a lie. If a spy came over and said that to me, I would say, "You're a liar. You're a liar." Because for us to be a grasshopper next to this person would have to be probably at least maybe 1,000 feet tall. And that's not what the giants even in the Bible are supposed to be. People are talking about 9, 13, 15 feet. Not 1,000 feet. If you were 1,000 feet human, but you couldn't get that big. The laws of nature, biology. Your bones would snap. You would just crush into a heap on the ground and die. It doesn't work that way, folks. Alright, so they were lying. And that's why the exaggeration is so ridiculous, is to demonstrate that these people were lying. They were so afraid of going into battle that they tried to convince everyone, "Oh, we're going to get killed. These people are unbelievably big and powerful. They're big," that's their version of the Hollywood giant. They're trying to paint this picture of something you'll never win against, and they were defying God when they did that, because God said, "Don't worry about it. I'm taking care of it." But they didn't trust God, and that's why they were punished. They didn't trust God. It's not because they refused to go into battle. They didn't trust God to win the battle for them. So if we go back to Genesis, where it talks about these Nephilim, what are these Nephilim? And you know what? Actually, I'm going to divert one more time here. There are some other passages in the Bible that talk about, things of this nature. Obviously, David and Goliath comes to mind. David was a smaller man. Who knows? He might have been 5'8", kind of an average. He might have been 5'6" or something. But Goliath was really, really big. And according to people's calculations from the Bible, I believe he was about 9 feet tall. Okay? 9 feet tall is big. It's big. It's borderline. Honestly, I don't quite understand how someone who's 9 foot tall could even function in this world, let alone be a great warrior. The amount of mass that they have to carry, and then you've got this giant club and a sword. Again, it just goes against the laws of physics and everything. So I don't have any tools here to look up how that is established that he was 9 feet tall. But 9 feet tall is in some way, shape, or form conceivable. I mean, it's kind of on the border for me, but it's conceivable. But when you're talking about cubits and things, the length from an arm to the end of the arm, that's the cubit, and I don't know. I just don't know. And you're not going to know everything. And I don't have the tools to research it without my computer. But that's where they talk about, Goliath being this giant. Was he really a giant? Was he really 9 feet tall? Or was he just really big, like a basketball player today? And again, for short spurts, those basketball players seem pretty agile and everything. But you put them in the real world, and just something as simple as climbing into a small car is a chore for them. They're not as agile as you think. I would much rather be the height I am than to be, 7 feet tall and making $1 million throwing a ball around. I mean, I'm much more agile. I mean, I can't play basketball as well, but then again, that's kind of a pointless thing to do with your life anyway. So, it's fun, but anyway, getting off into basketball. Let's see here. Another thing in the Bible, another verse in the Bible that claims people use to justify this idea of giants is Og's bed. Og was the king of one of these Canaanite tribes, and it talks about Og every once in a while in the Bible, but in one place in particular it says that his bed was, and then it gives it in cubits, but it comes out to about 4 feet wide by 13 feet long. Okay, so the people who want to push this idea of giants say, there you go. How much more evidence do you need? The Bible comes right out and it gives you the dimensions of his bed. And let us reason together. The movie Envy, with Ben Stiller and Jack Black. If you watch the movie Envy, when Jack Black suddenly becomes rich and he starts buying all these big, huge things, the big house and the carousel outside his house, when you go into the bedroom and you look at their bed, he and his wife are sitting in the bed, and the bed is like 20 feet long and 12 feet wide. People like big things to show off when they're rich, right? Bigger than they need. They have these big cars, they have these big houses, everything's big with them. They're trying to show off. Now, remember King Solomon. King Solomon had 700 wives. A king, generally, especially back then, is going to have a harem of sorts. They're going to have, they're going to have their wife or their wives. They're going to have, servant women who serve in bed as well. You get my point. I'm trying not to go there. But the thing is, these Og and the Canaanites were pagans who engaged in all kinds of debauchery. That's one reason God said to wipe them out, is because they were just absolute degenerates, and that's going to include sexual degeneracy. Well, if you're used to having 100 women with you in your orgies, you need a big bed, don't you? I mean, what are you going to do? Have a little king or queen size bed from today? I mean, I guess you can fit a couple people on there. So there's a lot of explanations for why the bed would be 13 feet long. I mean, if I had the money, I might have a bed that's 13 feet long. I like to sit on my bed and read, and it's a comfortable place. So it doesn't prove anything, and in fact, there's actually one fellow who had interesting argument. The dimensions given for that bed in cubits, which goes to like 4 feet wide, 13 feet long, those same dimensions were the dimensions of a bed, I believe, of Marduk, which was one of those fake gods. Okay? So he was making an argument that the reason the Bible mentioned the dimensions of Og's bed for no apparent reason, it wasn't to tell you he was a giant, it was to tell you that he was dimensioning his bed after Marduk, this false god. In other words, it was talking about Og's religious degeneracy. It wasn't talking about his physical size. And, that's a possible explanation. I don't know. It's speculation. Let us reason together. People trying to figure out what it means. God doesn't just put it in front of you. He forces you to study it and research it and figure it out. All right? But those are the kinds of things that we have in the Bible that justify this idea of giants. The Hollywood giants, the big, huge, 15 feet tall, in the beanstalk kind of thing. It doesn't really just blatantly come out and say there were gigantic, huge people who violate the laws of physics and nature and all this. It doesn't say that. Okay, there's a lot that talks about big people, but then again, big is relative to the other person. If you're a midget, then I'm big. I'm a giant. And folks, I'm not a giant. I'm as average as you get in terms of height. But if I'm next to a small child or a little person, I look like a giant. And if that's all who's in the room and an observer comes in and writes down what's going on, they're going to say that other person looked like a giant compared to them. Okay, so it's one thing to say Goliath was this tall, but if the Bible doesn't tell you how tall the other people were, how do you know he's a giant? Now, I think when it comes to Goliath, I think they give cubit measurements that comes out to around 9 feet. So you do have some kind of, subjective description of his actual height. But as a general rule, giants, what I'm getting at here is that we don't know exactly what the giants thing means. We just don't know. There are various explanations, but we have to look at what we do know. And what do we know? Well, we know that the Bible doesn't have that emphasis on it. It doesn't come out and tell you that. So it doesn't seem to feel that it's important for you to know the specifics of that. Well, why is that? Maybe because when God wrote His Word and He knew it would be translated throughout the years into other languages, maybe He didn't want it to be translated to the word giants. Maybe He wanted it to just say Nephilim, like He said in the first place. Moses wrote Nephilim. The word Nephilim had no meaning. You had to figure it out from the context. But somebody put the word giants in there when they translated it. Now, the word giants has a meaning in the real world. It means someone who's really big, at least compared to you. But what if Nephilim meant something completely, entirely different? And I've got bees, so I gotta shut the windows here. Got a small swarm of bees up here. So what could that possibly be? What could this Nephilim be? Let's go back to that part of Genesis here. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. Now, presumably that means, by those days, it means the days preceding Noah. So after that, presumably means the days after the flood and after Noah himself. Okay, were there giants? Are there all these reports outside of Greek mythology, the Titans and all that? Were there giants? Were there giants in the earth? Are there giants now? I mean, we're hearing reports from the people who grasp hold of this giant thing and they won't let go. They're believing reports from Afghanistan that the U.S. military has encountered giants in the mountains. And they even killed one and got their bones. Back in the 1800s, there were all these little, every once in a while, a newspaper story saying, bones of a giant found in California. And there's all these reports, and these people who grab hold of this thing, they keep appealing to that. See, there it is. A newspaper report right back then says that they found giant bones. There's a drawing of it right there. Someone, they didn't have cameras, but someone drew a picture of these huge bones. Now, we don't know where the bones are. They were probably secreted away by the Smithsonian Institute and hidden so that nobody would ever know the truth. But there it is, right there in print in the newspaper. A newspaper like the Star Tribune in Minnesota, the one that refuses to tell anybody about the incredible human suffering of 20,000 homeless people in Minnesota. It refuses to tell anybody the truth. Or the Star Tribune newspaper in Minnesota that tells everybody all this nonsense about coronavirus health scare to maintain the coronavirus health scare. Sorry, folks, newspapers lie. Newspapers sensationalize. That was a little story, not some big controversy with a congressional, Senate investigation into the huge bones and all that. It was just a little story in a newspaper way back when, right next to the one about the Bat Boy and the alien abductions and all this other stuff. Newspapers do that. It's called filler. Now, yeah, there's a lot of references to very large bones. The thing is, where are any of these bones? Where are any of the evidence for that? You see, when they talk about those giants today, it sounds a lot like Bigfoot and UFOs. Okay, there's sightings of Bigfoot all over the place. There's photos, there's video, there's all this, but there's nothing that even resembles proof of Bigfoot. And there's no Bigfoot bones. Nothing. UFOs, sightings out the wazoo. There's all kinds of sightings of UFOs from all around the world. And 100 years ago, before they had aircraft and they only had maybe balloons, the UFOs looked like balloons. And 2,000 years ago when they saw UFOs, what did they look like, folks? They looked like chariots. You see, the UFO always looks like what that particular generation can conceive of as their highest technology, or a little bit beyond. But where's the proof? There's no proof. Oh, hey, Paul, haven't you heard? The U.S. military, the Air Force, is even releasing videos of UFOs. They're admitting that there's UFOs and that they violate the laws of this and that, and even pilots are coming out and saying they're not of this world. Okay. First of all, I've seen those videos, maybe you have as well, and what are they? They're a little dot bouncing around a screen. While pilots are sitting there going, oh, wow, man, look at that, about how cool it is. Is that how a professional pilot responds? The first thing I thought of when I saw that video was, I'm a little concerned. If this is how our pilots behave professionally in the cockpit, do I want my tax dollars paying for that plane for this pilot? They're going to sit up there and oh my gosh, look at how cool that is. I would think they would be thinking, this could be potentially a threat to the people who we are sworn to defend. We should behave professionally and communicate professionally and figure out what this is and try to make sure that that threat doesn't hurt anybody. That's what I would expect professionals to do. You see, folks, the government lies. Just like the newspaper lies, the government lies. Why would the government come out with this thing about UFOs? One of the, if not the most respected, I'm sorry I don't remember his name offhand, the most respected leader and initiator of Israel's space program. He's just, like Carl Sagan on steroids kind of thing. Although Carl Sagan didn't actually do anything, but this guy did. But he helped with the space program. He's a general. He's an Israeli hero. He came out and publicly said that the Americans and the Israelis are working with I think it's gray aliens, on a base on Mars, underground on Mars. Okay, this guy's not a loony bird. This guy's as stable as they can possibly come. You don't get all that security clearance and get through all that and being that wacky. One of the leaders in Canada came out and said something very similar. Now, why would they do that? There's no proof of it. Why, if you spent your whole life living in classified world and you think that this is right to hide all these things from the people, and then once you get out of office where you have no credibility anymore to really say anything, you can't prove anything, then you suddenly come out and tell this tall tale that makes no sense. We've got a base with, but only America and Israel are working with the great aliens on research. Like, aliens who travel across the universe need us to help them with their research. Right. In an underground base in Mars. You see, it's called deception. Take heed that no man deceive you. What Sun Tzu said about warfare, all warfare is based on deception. These are distractions. This guy in Israel, he came right out and said, I'm 80 years old. I could care less about my reputation anymore. So as he's leaving his office, as he retires, what's he do? He does one last thing for his country. He issues forth this ridiculous deception that's going to send a whole bunch of people that might be researching what Israel's really doing in their military and sending them off looking for things on Mars. It's called a distraction. It's a technique of warfare. It's a lie. It's deceit. And the same thing with Bigfoot. You've got all these people talking about Bigfoot. You have people who call themselves professional Bigfoot researchers. And personally, I think there probably is something out there like a Bigfoot, but just like the UFOs, I believe those are demonic entities, again, just meant to deceive you. And that's why so many people can see these things, but no one ever has any proof of it. Ever. Ever. After 100 years of sightings of these things, there's nothing to prove a Bigfoot. There's nothing to prove UFOs. I think they actually are there, but I think they're demonic entities, and that's the whole point. That's the whole point of it. But if you don't accept that and you don't believe that, then you've got to start looking somewhere else for explanations, don't you? Well, evolution created this, this alternate, Gigantopithecus is still living with us. It's Bigfoot now, and UFOs, they have the gray aliens and the tall blondes and the reptilians, and you just build this whole universe of fantasy land around these myths that you want so badly to believe. But sometimes things are a lot simpler than they appear. Demons appear to people as a giant hairy creature to scare them, but more importantly, to make people think evolution is legitimate. Because evolution doesn't have the missing link it needs. It has nothing. It has nothing to justify a belief in evolution. There's no science. There's nothing. There's no archaeological proof of anything. There's no missing links. There's no transitional fossils. There's nothing. Well, if you can get a demon to walk around and pretend that there's big, hairy human beings who look like an evolutionary offshoot, a fairly recent one, if you can get people to believe in that, that seems to justify the idea of evolution without even proving that these Bigfoots exist. See, it's all psychological. Same thing with UFOs. Well, God created the heavens and the earth. He created all this. The implication, at least in the Bible, is that we are the only living beings in the universe, that the universe was created for our pleasure by God. It was created so we would look at it and marvel at it, and we would never know that there wasn't a God, because you just look at the magnificence of creation and it's obvious. Like the Bible says, if you look at the world you live in and you think there's no God who created it, then you are, quote, without excuse on Judgment Day. Because it's obvious. Look at what he did. If you want to spend your entire existence trying to come up with explanations for everything you see, the vastness of the universe, the magnificence of it, the complexity of DNA, if you want to go and look for all these things, you can waste your whole life. Instead of pursuing God, you can pursue that nonsense and then die and go to Judgment Day, and God's going to say, you were without excuse. I gave you this whole universe to prove I exist. The heavens declare the glory of God. That's what the Bible says. But instead of just marveling at that glory and getting to know your Creator, you spent your entire existence trying to prove that your Creator doesn't exist. And now you're asking me to come into heaven? That's what Judgment Day is going to be like. You spent your entire existence trying to convince your fellow humans that I didn't even exist. And now you're standing before, or you're groveling before me, saying, I'm sorry, I didn't know. And it's like, you're an astrophysicist. You saw more of the magnificence and the beauty of the universe than anyone else. But you wouldn't believe that a creator created it, would you? You had to look for some ridiculous explanation, like absolutely nothing existed, nothing whatsoever. And then all of a sudden that nothing went boom in a big bang and created everything. You wanted to believe that. You see, let us reason together, folks. There are explanations for Bigfoot, UFOs, Big Bang, evolution, all these ridiculous ideas that people have latched onto, and they're going to have a really bad judgment day because of it. Because the heavens declare the glory of God. It's already there. Well, something similar here with giants. Yes, there might have been very tall people. There might have even possibly have been 9 foot tall. A couple of them. But they're not going to be very agile. Did you ever ask the question, okay, David with a sling. Okay, now if you're good with a sling, yeah, you can pretty much nail the bullseye with it. You know, just like someone with a hatchet. I mean, there's some incredibly skilled people out there. And no matter what David's size, if he takes the rock and he swings that thing, gets it cooking, and releases it, and bam, it hits Goliath in the head. Did you ever ask the burning question, though? If these guys are in battle, if you're in a duel and you have a big knife, you have a saber, but the guy over there has a gun, and he pulls out the gun, but you're in battle. You're not in a standoff. You're in a war. You're in battle. Are you just gonna stand there and get shot in the head while he gets this thing aligned? And let's see, where's his forehead? There it is. There we go. If you're in battle, you're moving around. You're dancing. You're in motion. I don't picture the David and Goliath thing as Goliath just standing there on a hill waiting to get shot. I picture it as Goliath headed to his way. That means he's in motion like this. Well, when you're swinging this thing, how do you hit a bullseye in the forehead when he's in motion like that? How do you do that? I mean, it's possible you could get a lucky shot, or God may have guided the shot. But it sounds like David was really good with a sling, which is a legitimate weapon back then. Okay, but the takeaway I want you to get from that question is this. If you're in battle and you've got this giant who violates really the laws of nature, or at least comes this close to it, giants are not very agile. Yes, a basketball player can be, but they're not giants. They're maybe 6.5, 7 feet tall. They're not 9 feet tall. And even they can barely function in the real world as well as everyone else. They really struggle with it. They really do. And if you get taller than that, like the tallest people in the Guinness Book of World Records, they had miserable lives. Absolutely miserable lives. It was like being born with arthritis or something. I mean, you couldn't function properly. Well, if Goliath is out there and David hit him, it's very hard to hit a moving target, especially a moving target that is intelligent and is deliberately dodging you. So if Goliath was in motion like someone who is agile, someone who has the ability to move around and dodge and parry and spin and do all this stuff, it's going to be really hard, if not impossible, for David to hit him in the forehead. Again, unless God guides it, and that could be. But another possibility of this is that Goliath was this big lumbering guy who was so big that if someone came up to him to fight him, he could just wipe him out because of his size. But he couldn't really run around the field because he's huge. He's bigger than a human's supposed to be, so he can barely function. Well, if that's the case, then that big lumbering Goliath is more or less going to be standing in one place waiting for you to come to him. Well, if he's standing there, then you swing this, and it's pretty easy for David to hit him right in the forehead because he's not really moving. It's easy to hit someone, if you're skilled with a sling, to hit a bullseye on a non-moving target. You might even be able to hit a moving target. But what about an intelligent moving target that is dodging you, that moves in random ways? I mean, they tell us today, even us, if you've got an active shooter in your business or something, run away and keep moving, move randomly. Why? Because it dramatically increases your chances of survival. You got to get these movie visions out of your head. When you have a real gun in your hand, aiming that thing at a moving target Now, if you're just moving, if you're just running away, then it's easy. You know, you can just fire a bit ahead and it hits you. But if you're zigzagging and moving around, I mean, it's very, very difficult to get hit there unless you're close to them. It's the same thing here with David and Goliath. If Goliath was this big, huge, gigantic, 9-foot tall person, he probably wasn't very agile. It wasn't a good thing for him. It was a bad thing. It made his life miserable, probably. And that's a different thing than this picture that's being painted by these prophecy experts who paint a whole race of giants, people who are 13 feet tall. They have beds that are 13 feet long. And they're super agile, just super warriors, straight out of Hollywood. That's very different than, Goliath and his brothers. I mean, it's very different than that. So what could the Nephilim be? Alright, I'm going to have to take a short break here, and I will be back to tell you this. Or at least what I think it is.